So I'm not gonna hold you, man. I just want to know about this Chris Paul thing. Well, I just want to know more about it. I'm not asking for all your information. I keep seeing um, this trade stuff, or this potential trade stuff with him, and I'm just bringing up this thing because I saw this list of teams that apparently came from you that are interested in trading for Chris Paul: Bucks, Knicks, Mavs, Jazz, Suns, Sixers.
Nuggets, Pelicans as well.
Okay, okay. So now, what the I guess I wanted to go into this in a little bit, but let me start out by just asking because I saw Lakers floating around out there, LeBron, Banana Boat, all that. So how come they're not on that list?
Well, that was my report from September. If you look at the date, Labor Day weekend, I had spoken to someone in the know. And basically what was said to me was, and this was when the playoffs were still going on, and obviously the Thunder had gone home from the bubble. And basically, as the finals were over, playoffs were over, and we get into that space where we're figuring out when the NBA was to resume, you're going to see more and more teams reflecting and looking at their roster and how they're trying to improve, and really looking at Chris Paul as a case study on how he basically helps teams. I use this analogy, and I've used it on other shows that didn't quite get it. You are of hip hop and you know soul music, so you'll get it perfectly. You know how in hip hop music, or particularly, how our black queens will say, I want Erykah Badu to be my doula.
Right.
So
Right.
Basically, Chris Paul is going to become the NBA doula. He's going to be the guy that comes to a young team and makes them better.
Yeah.
When you looked at the Thunder this season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was already an All-NBA first teamer when he played for the Clippers, if I'm not mistaken. Comes to Oklahoma City, if you remember on the programming that I was doing with Basketball Society last fall, I said that the Thunder were going to be a young team to watch out for. And really and truly, Chris Paul's leadership was cool, but that young team was already poised and already groomed in a lot of ways. You had a mixture of veteran and young people. So I think when you look and when people within the NBA see that he's not a cancer, he's a guy that's just a positive guy in the locker room, Phoenix comes to mind because you saw what happened with the center, DeAndre Ayton, and he's come back and been suspended and he's doing his thing. But he's a guy that's, the current climate of basketball is very guard-centered, but I remember talking to Ray Allen a couple years ago about how he believed that the big man was making a return. And you look at guys like Karl-Anthony Towns, you look at Joel Embiid, Ayton fits that as well, and I think that Chris Paul would make a monster out of him in a good way on the floor if he does come to Phoenix. But then you have the situation with the Bucks in Milwaukee, where, Giannis is looking for, as I also tweeted Labor Day weekend about, a list that was presented to Bucks brass as it related to, he was with his mother and his brother and talked about some of the things that, he was looking for. And so when you look at all the possibilities is there. When you look at the Knicks, the Knicks are the Knicks. The Knicks can always Knick, but I use Carmelo Anthony in this instance. He left Denver and came to New York, and even though he didn't win a championship, he's still in the league. He hasn't retired. The Knicks are a top-selling team, and he got into James Dolan's contact list and was able to market himself in a certain way. Chris Paul, to me, coming to New York with the Knicks, as I mentioned, there was a deal lined up, which could include Kevin Knox and some of those other pieces. But if he's able to come in there, R.J. Barrett's there, Mitchell Robinson's there, that makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you get the sense that Chris Paul would rather, like, I get the whole go into a young team and helping them get better like he did OKC, but Milwaukee at least gives them a chance to compete for a title. So do you get the sense that he has a preference for that situation as opposed to a Phoenix or a Knicks, where it's like you're kind of just wasting out the rest of your career helping other people get better?
The way I've heard it was Chris Paul, as my report came out the other day, he is intrigued by the Bucks, particularly teaming up with Giannis, and those conversations that the Thunder and the Suns have had have been very exploratory. But really and truly, you make mention of the Bucks, but the crazy thing is, Devin Booker is no slouch, man. Could you, if the Phoenix Suns,
you put it that way? I mean, yeah. When you put it that way, yeah.
And what I'll tell you is, Phoenix, like the Minnesota Timberwolves, like the Orlando Magic. A former player has said this to me last week. They're pit stops. They're not LA Lakers. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not at this point Brooklyn Nets. They're not.
Yeah. Or even Miami. Like Miami's not really a pit stop anymore. They're kind of like official now, I guess.
They're not Orlando. So
right.
So that being said, like you look at Trevor Ariza. He played for the Knicks. He played for the Orlando Magic. He won a championship with the Lakers. Orlando was a pit stop. Tracy McGrady was in Orlando, went to Houston. Toronto used to be a pit stop as well. Used to be.
Right.
And so when you look at, there's a lot of intricacies going on with, the Minnesota Timberwolves and or the Golden State Warriors and the 76ers. And, part of it is Minnesota does have interest in getting Devin Booker there, so they have the first pick, but there's if they're looking to get Devin Booker, they're going to have to make multiple moves with, or they're going to have to make a deal with more than just another team in order to facilitate something like that. So your initial question to me was about the Lakers. First of all, Chris Paul's contract, 2 years, $85 million is very hefty. So one, I reported this last year. I reported that the Lakers were monitoring Chris Paul's situation. And if he got a buyout, then they would try to make a move, right? And they laughed when I said that. But the thing is, in order for him to get to the Lakers, one of two things would have to happen. Either one, he would have to take a buyout, or two, the Lakers and the Thunder would have to concoct a move, which would have to include Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Danny Green, and Kyle Kuzma. And probably include another team to make that happen, to make the mathematics add up. Kuzma was supposed to be the enticing piece going into the summer or free agency, what have you, because it's COVID, so free agency that was going to allow them to make some things happen. There has been talk about the intrigue of Victor Oladipo, kind of lighthearted, but I think a Chris Paul move would make more sense, particularly if one of those two things happens and Rajon Rondo signs with another team. Mm-hmm. It would have to be a combination of things in regard.
Okay. Can I ask you about Philly real quick? What's your feeling on the possibility of Philly? Like, is that a thing? Would Doc want to swing for that? Is that the kind of point guard move that? I mean, I feel like they need that kind of presence handling the ball at the helm of it, as opposed to just Ben Simmons being the be-all, end-all point guard. What's your feeling on Philly for Chris Paul?
First of all, I think it's no accident that Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers, both who have been co-workers of Chris Paul, are all in Philadelphia. One, two. I'll say it to you. Number one, you saw Philly in the playoffs move Shake Milton to the starting point guard position, moving Ben Simmons to the 4. That was really a replica of what they were doing in the playoffs the previous season, where you had Ben Simmons at the 4, getting to the basket, not having to control traffic, and you had Jimmy Butler almost like in a Scottie Pippen role in the half-court set. It almost felt like I was watching the San Antonio Spurs with Steven Jackson. It's just you had a scorer that could just get any shot they wanted in that type of space. But Jimmy flew the coop and went elsewhere, as did JJ Redick. This season, you had Shake Milton and moving without Ben Simmons. Now, I had Rashad Phillips on the Scoopy Radio podcast back in the spring, and he expressed to me that the Toronto Raptors are very high on LaMelo Ball. And that's why I said that the first pick and the second pick in this draft gets a little interesting and funky, because do the Timberwolves trade their pick? Do the Warriors trade their number 2 pick? And what Rashad said to me, and it's kind of escalated now, bear with me. When you look at the fact that the Raptors do want LaMelo Ball, as according to Rashad, basically the Raptors are trying to make a move in which they could potentially move Ben Simmons to the Golden State Warriors, which would then give the Sixers the number 2 pick, which they would flip, or they would draft LaMelo Ball and ship him to Toronto. In turn, the Sixers would get Kyle Lowry, and there will probably some other fillers. I wrote an article about it where I'm writing now at heavy.com. But basically, that could be scenario number 1, or scenario number 2, as Rashad has stated. Minnesota, say the Warriors don't want to give up that pick. That would then be Minnesota moving in the way that the Golden State Warriors would have moved.
Right.
I have heard that Ben privately is not happy in his role in Philadelphia and privately wants out, and that he doesn't want to deal with the ridicule of Philly fans, in the sense of he doesn't want to upset them. And you know how Philly fans are. They love their team, so I get it. And, it's been said to me, okay, fine. The Timberwolves don't get Devin Booker. Ben Simmons could be a consolation prize in that regard. And so basically, when it's all said and done, I'm going to answer your question. Philadelphia would make sense, except if the Sixers get Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry is another one of those players where I've reported that, there's been feelers. The Milwaukee Bucks are looking for a point guard.
Yeah.
And Kyle Lowry has been in Toronto for a long time. Victor Oladipo makes $16 to $20 million a year with the Pacers. And, will he go to the Knicks? Will he go, elsewhere? Will he go to the Lakers? And then you have Chris Paul in that situation. To me, say they were to move Kyle Lowry after they got him and go somewhere else, and then you find a way to bring in Chris Paul. There's a lot of variations in which why, it ties into the whole thing that I said about Chris Paul. The Sixers would have interest. Number one, I think for the basketball gods, it would make the fact that Chris Paul was traded to Oklahoma whole on the part of Daryl Morey, and would make it whole with, Doc Rivers is related to, their time with the Clippers, and they weren't able to beat the Golden State Warriors. So I'm bringing all this to say, I'm not rambling, but there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen between the draft and free agency. And there's a lot of teams talking, a lot of agents talking, a lot of players. And the other thing is a lot of things have been verbally agreed to that won't take shape until free agency happens. And a lot of people have spent time in the bubble having conversations that are going to come to fruition.
Scooby, my man, I appreciate you, bro.
Yes, sir.